Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Jamie Marriage. Wait a moment. Sorry about that. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Jamie Marriage and I am one of the speakers in the Embodiment Conference on the Trauma and Social Change channel. And it's also my great pleasure to be leading you through this short teaching on practices and protocols that you can have in place to keep yourself as safe as possible, but also to prime yourself for being open to receiving the challenges that I'm sure participation in this conference will bring. It's such a joy to be part of a celebration of the body. Our body is, yes, this beautiful vessel that carries us through life, yet it is such a source of information, intuition, and indeed grace. So before we go any farther with the little teaching I've prepared for you, I hope you can join me in some grounding. As a trauma specialist, I really believe grounding has to be the foundation of anything we do. My working definition of grounding is using any available sensory experience or indeed any available experience to either keep us anchored in the present moment or to return us home to the present moment if for some reason our attention wanders away, because let's face it, our attention will wander away. We are living in unprecedented, challenging times. And I don't know about all of you, but my grounding practices have been a lifesaver to me in these last several months. Okay, so wherever you're at, I will invite you to take a nice organic stretch. If you need to bring a sound into it, go ahead and bring a sound in. Think about what a dog, a cat, a baby might do when they first wake up. Not being bashful, not being afraid to do whatever feels nourishing in the body. Just let that happen over the next, 30 seconds or so. I could probably go longer, but I want to give you a good sampler here. All right, so now that you've engaged some movement, notice the stillness. You may keep your eyes closed or open. And indeed, that's a best practice that I like to establish for myself and with anybody I serve, that keeping the eyes open may be a strong anchor for safety to really help you ensure that, yes, I am still here now and present, even though I may be visiting some challenging material. Yet if closing the eyes does help you drop in further, concentrate, relax further, by all means, close the eyes. Just maybe try as you go through the different practices in the summit to rotate between the two and notice if closing the eyes or keeping them open works better for you and in what contexts. For example, some practices I like to keep my eyes open, other practices I prefer keeping them closed. So actually, we'll begin with the sensory scan, and for that, it is best to keep the eyes open. So I'll invite you, my friends, to take a look around your room and notice what you see. Notice colors, maybe notice shapes. Perhaps notice how you visualize texture. And then moving to your sense of hearing or sound, after I stop talking, notice in this moment what either you're hearing or maybe you're not hearing, or there's an absence of sound. Moving now to your sense of smell, same thing. Notice in this moment, in this space you're in, if there's perhaps a smell or a lack of smell. And for taste, you can either swallow and notice if there's a taste you're aware of right now, or if you have a beverage nearby, perhaps you pick up that beverage and with mindful intent, take a sip. And notice the taste. Perhaps taking another sip now, noticing the taste and the sensation. Is there a sensation as you swallow? And continuing with touch or sensation, maybe make contact with an object you have nearby. You can also make contact with your clothes. And just notice how that feels to the touch. You have many different options here for engaging the sense of touch. You may bring your feet to the ground deliberately. If you're sitting in a chair, it might be even easier to press your feet down into the ground. If you're already down here on the ground, you may take the pads of your fingers, press them into the floor in this mudra or gesture of Mother Earth. You could just touch the floor, touch the space, even rub your hands together, just being observant of touch contact. Now, of the 5 major senses that we just scanned, I'd like you to notice which 2 most resonated for you, because we all seem to have our sense or 2 that are the strongest for us. So for me, it's visual and touch. For you, it might be taste and smell. So once you've identified your 2 most resonant, what I'd like you to do is enroll 2 anchors. So if one of them is visual, perhaps look around your space, especially if you know you'll be taking in a lot of the material from this conference in the space you're currently in, and maybe say, okay, that stool over there. So for instance, I'm looking at a stool with like a yellow cushion on it. I can always look at that stool and know that I am here and now and present. I can look at my singing bowl, which I'm seeing over there, and notice that I'm here and now and present. So those would be my visual anchors. And for my touch anchors, it might be, okay, I can make contact with my mask. I can make contact with this rock. So take about 30 seconds here to enroll your anchor objects or your anchor experiences. It's again, just making contact with them, noticing them. And the value of having anchors is just that you know they're there as a home base to return to, especially if as you're taking in content, you personally may be feeling triggered or overwhelmed or getting a little what we might call dissociative or floaty. That can be very normal when we take in high impact material. So having these anchors to use regularly can help with this, keeping us here and now and present. And let's be frank, in the modern world in which we find ourselves, especially if we're doing healing work and doing advocacy work to address the impact of trauma, to address the impact of systemic oppression, to address all of these horrible conditions that we see plaguing our world right now, if you're on the front lines experiencing them or helping others, keeping yourself grounded, at least grounded enough, is so important. So perhaps consider how even using this sensory scan and anchor objects technique can help you with that. So typically in my office, I have a desk over there where I usually do a lot of my education. I'm here in more of the studio portion. I try to make sure I'm surrounded by a paradise of sensory experiences. Things I can make touch contact with, sound contact with at any time. So I have my stress ball here that I really like. I have a seed that means a lot to me. Perhaps you even have a protector figure. For instance, Wonder Woman is one of mine. She's been with me since I was a child. And often when I'm just feeling a little ungrounded or maybe headachy, as I sometimes get when I'm at my computer so much, I can often look at her or just hold her in my hand and just sense into some of that, what she means to me. Strength, protection, feminine fierceness. If you're more of a sound person, maybe having some objects. I mentioned a singing bowl earlier, or tingshaws. Even your own music that you play on a playlist can be a nice anchor for you. And a fun one, because I really believe adults by and large have lost the ability to play, is to keep soap bubbles, if those are available to you. And never underestimate the healing impact of just blowing some bubbles and maybe dancing around with them or reaching out. And if you make a mistake with them, laugh at yourself. And even sometimes when I do online or virtual work with people, we'll blow bubbles with each other, just right into the screen as a way to connect. So please feel free to use any of these elements of play that may be savoring or nurturing for you. So as a trauma specialist, when I work with others, and anything I share with others are skills that I've worked on for myself. That's a huge value that I hold dear, that I never want to share with someone else what I haven't first tried for myself, because I fundamentally believe the best yoga teachers, the best martial arts teachers, the best trauma therapists, the best body workers, etc., anybody who applies for this conference, that we share our practices. And when we could really bring it down to this idea of I am sharing my practice with you, it can take our ego out of the way. It can take our fear and trepidation out of the way, because if we are staying grounded, if we keep breathing, if we stay connected to that sense of our value and our ethics, it really becomes a gift to do what we do instead of a challenge. Not to say it can't still be challenging or something that causes us more stress, but at the end of the day, we are sharing our practices. So the practices that I like to share with the people I serve generally fall into these categories. Grounding, and I covered grounding with you and gave you some examples for grounding, because I think in going into some of these other practices, which can be a little more challenging, you must make sure that you and the individual you serve have a ground to return to. If a practice like breath, which is the next category, gets a little overwhelming. One of the very most important teachings I learned as I started out on this embodiment path was from Mark Lilly, who is the founder of Street Yoga, and I had an opportunity to take some training with him. And he said breath can be both a trigger and a resource. Yoga can be both a trigger and a resource. Really, all of these embodiment practices we're covering can be overwhelming for people, but they can also be a resource for people. And a lot of times the journey is working with it when a person gets triggered or activated to be able to address what that is underneath. But in order to do that, in order to make the trigger a resource, it has to be done in this place of staying well grounded. And if you as the practitioner can stay well grounded, you will model that for your clients in teaching them the importance of grounding, or students or other people that you serve. So breathing. Breath is life dancing through us is a teaching that I often share in my dancing mindfulness work. So breath, when I teach it to others, I usually like to start with just a simple breath tracking, this idea of befriending the breath, saying hello to the breath. And I know if you're a yoga teacher, if you're a specialist who does breath work, you likely have a lot of other breath strategies that you use and teach, and those are all well and beautiful. But I do think it has to start with this basic of just a grounded, acquainted breath. So that's what I will lead you through here. And I'll give you a little cueing that you can do to visit this breath if it ever feels like you're wandering away from it. So same thing, closing the eyes or leaving them open. So perhaps take this moment to say hello to your breath. Maybe you've already been rushing around today. And it's been difficult to take some time to really breathe. So let's take that time together. You don't have to do anything special with your breath. Simply notice it. Notice the natural rise and fall of the breath. Notice any subtle shifts in your body as the breath rises and falls. Maybe you're aware of a temperature. Perhaps the breath is cool as you inhale. You notice that coolness in the nose, and maybe it's warm as you exhale, or perhaps the temperature is neutral. Just be aware of what's true for you. Maybe there's even a sensation, a subtle sound you're picking up on. So I will give us about 2 minutes together to simply be with the breath. Before I start the 2 minutes, I'd like to give you just a few other modifications or assurances. A lot of people think, if I can't sit still, if I can't pay attention to my breath, I have failed mindfulness. That's totally not the case. I think many people we serve, and perhaps many of us, set themselves up to fail with practicing mindfulness because of the modern marketing around mindfulness, right? You can go on Google Images or some other internet search engine and click mindfulness. And usually what comes up is like ripples along a pond, maybe a lotus, or usually a very perfect looking person sitting underneath a tree on a beach doing this. And I know I've been guilty of this, and as some of my clients certainly report this, thinking, well, if I'm not that, so I'm not a very mindful person, I'm not Zen, I can't relax. Mindfulness, one of the definitions of mindfulness I really like, based on the Sanskrit translation, is it's the practice of coming back to awareness. That awareness, yes, is our natural state, but because of the realities of the human experience and the world in which we live, we'll be pulled from that natural state. And so the practice is in the coming back. The practice isn't necessarily, can you sit on this cushion and track your breath for 25 minutes? It's, can you notice when the attention drifts and invite it back? Because even noticing that the attention has drifted is showing you're paying attention somehow. That is a mindfulness practice. So as we go into this 2-minute breath practice, if you catch your attention wandering, it doesn't mean you have failed. And really during any of these practices you might do during the Embodiment Conference, if you're struggling with it, doesn't mean you're failing. Just notice, be curious if your attention drifts and see if you can invite it back. A couple other modifications or safety notes. Some people do find it difficult to purely concentrate on breath. So a couple thoughts. You can hold one of your anchors while you breathe. Perhaps holding the rock or your special figure in your hand. That may help you stay more grounded. Of course, you can close the eyes or leave them open. And another mantra or saying that you can bring in, inspired by Buddha's teaching, is, as I breathe in, I know I'm breathing in. As I breathe out, I know I'm breathing out. So if it helps you to say that to yourself as you breathe, beautiful. You can also modify it by saying in and out. So let's take our 2 minutes together to be present with the breath. So staying in this place of silence, I'll ask you to notice what you're noticing now. And I'm not looking for any right or wrong answer. This is how we build body awareness. After these practices, we ask, what am I noticing now? Just from the spirit of curiosity. You can briefly scan the body from head to toe, maybe check inside the heart, make contact with the third eye here. And it could be you're noticing, yes, I am feeling more grounded, more settled, more presence. I really like the silence. It could be you're noticing, wow, I hate the silence. That's very challenging for me to just sit still for 2 minutes. Okay, notice that information. And when you get that information, the challenge then becomes, what do I do with it? Maybe it's a challenge to practice being more still, because I do believe we as people need silence. I know I do. And some folks are scared of silence because, well, I have to be alone with my thoughts and with my body, so I always have to be stimulating with something. So maybe the challenge here is when you do small practices like this to settle down, you start to notice more things. And perhaps that can inspire you, wow, if I do this more often, what else might I notice? And how can those noticings serve where I'm headed in the direction of my recovery and in my consciousness just as a being? So grounding, breathing, any kind of work in silence is important. Yet another imperative I stress with my folks that I serve is the importance of physical movement. So it could be taking one of these organic stretches like we did at the beginning of our time together. And I truly want to impart to you, because I do a lot of online education and I tell my students this, at any time, if you need to get up and take a stretch like this, just move the body freely. I know there's a lot of conscious dancers and movers and shakers in the group, so let that be a part of your learning experience, especially when you're sitting on a computer and taking in so much visually. Maybe even ask, how can I bring my eyes and my head into my dance or my movement a little bit, particularly if it feels like they've been straining just a little bit too long. So movement, of course, can take various forms. I remember Derek Huff, the dancer, I read somewhere once, think of the word movement. It means we're meant to move as people. And even if you don't have the fullness of physical mobility, is there a place in your body where you can experience just a bit of movement? And maybe it is connecting with that sensation of breath as a dance. Other options, obviously stretching, yoga, tai chi, qigong, the martial arts, the various movement practices that are being emphasized in this conference are beautiful to be done either in large doses or small doses. Going outside and taking the walk, even taking a walk in your space, just some practice you can engage in to move out, to diffuse, to neutralize some of the energy that may be building up in your body. Another little short form practice I like to do throughout my therapeutic work and teaching work on the computer is engaging this process of energy flicking. Just maybe notice what's rising up in the body and send it down to the earth. And indeed, any practitioner of energy work, any practitioner of indigenous healing arts I've studied with has really emphasized that vitality of the ground, the earth, that the ground, the earth wants to absorb that negativity because the ground, Mother Earth, just has that amazing capacity to transform it for us. So various times throughout the day, send it down. A strategy I've given to a lot of my clients, and it's one that I use quite a lot myself these days, is when you consume news, after you engage in any period of reading news, watching news, can you give yourself a few minutes for this release ritual? A lot of us struggle with, do I practice good self-care and set the boundary and not take in so much news, but I also want to be an informed citizen. And I know that a lot of you are advocates, especially working in the field of diversity and inclusion, and you want to stay informed, and that's a beautiful thing. But please don't ever deny the impact that taking in all that media can have on your body, especially as an energetic, highly sensitive being. So whether it's energy flicking or some other process that you engage in to have some kind of a release ritual, please make sure that you do that, preferably using some kind of physical movement. So obviously part of the challenge of these times we're living in, yes, there's the coronavirus and the new reality of living into which it has shifted most of us. But we're also in unprecedented times working with issues of diversity and inclusion and helping individuals heal the long-standing trauma of oppression. These are not new issues. And I know I said we're in unprecedented times, but especially for the individuals who have experienced the wounds of oppression and being put down for who you are, who you love, this has been your reality since day one. I would say something that the environment of modern times and the virus has done is it's brought things more into our awareness, more into our attention. And for those of us who work in the field of trauma and embodiment, we're now faced with these questions of what do we do with it, especially if we do have a lot of privilege. How do we address that privilege, and how do we, what I mean more by addressing it is how do we use it to best serve our humankind? And I know that's a lot of what I've been working with these last several months. And I really want to emphasize that part of being an enlightened embodiment worker in this day and age is to realize that so many of these practices that we are sharing with our clients do have very ancient, very indigenous roots. And it's important to honor those. It's important to honor those. Something that I have always said in the sharing of dancing mindfulness, which is a practice that I created, but I say created with editorial quotation marks because all I've really done is I've created a container that we can use in modern times to practice both dance and to adapt mindfulness to be used in modern times with modern music. And it really speaks to the teaching I've gotten and received from my mindfulness work that any human activity can be engaged in mindfully. So why not dancing and cooking and gardening and expressive arts? But the practice is not mine. Yoga is not mine. And I know this is treading into an area potentially of some controversy because there can be a lot of discussion in our circles and communities about, well, this is the thing I created and this is my business and this, that, and the other. And it's okay to have a business, but you have to understand that what we are doing and what we are sharing is not ours. It belongs to the earth and to the first peoples who inhabited the earth. That yes, a lot of what we share with each other in these embodied practices are common. The teaching I love is that of Sanatan Dharma, or universal truth or Dharma, that which we all share really is what is truth. But I think it becomes very important to recognize that what we are doing at this conference all has roots in people, in places, in times that are much older than us. And it is important to give that credit where credit's due. And something I've learned and have worked on in my own work is if you are sharing a practice from a culture that is not your own, to make sure that you really know about that practice. And if you have the permission, the clearance to be sharing it, and to realize that there are differences between adaptation, which is needed, and appropriation. So I say this just because I think it's part of this greater challenge we're being called into right now, which is to look deeper. And I know that's something I want to be doing as a person of privilege. And I encourage and thank all of you who are doing that work. So something I'd like to wrap up with is the importance of the 4 healing salves. Many of us in embodiment culture have been exposed to this work through Angela Sarayan or Gabrielle Roth, which is looking at the 4 main healing practices that Indigenous healing has in common. So those practices are, of course, singing, dancing, storytelling, and silence. Singing, dancing, storytelling, and silence. Wow, that was a Freudian slip, but maybe it's not. Maybe there is a scientific healing power in that force of silence. So in thinking of this collection of tools that you can take into your work through the Embodiment Conference and in your work with others, maybe ask, how can singing help me? You may not fancy yourself a very big singer or music maker, but even just the practice of humming. How can that help you settle in? How can that help you express? So a practice I do with a lot of my clients is to have them make playlists. This day and age, especially with smartphones, it can become a lot easier to make playlists, and those can be playlists you sing along with, playlists you dance along with, or simply playlists that you can listen to and really feel into the fullness of the present moment, feel into the fullness of your grounding, and just this general embodiment that we're celebrating. Storytelling. One thing that I have been inspired by and looking at healing arts from other cultures is this idea that storytelling does not have to be all narrative, does not have to be all verbal. That yes, we may sit around a circle or write our story into narrative form in a book, but maybe to consider how dance is a method for telling your story, how visual art can be your method for telling a story. Even preparing a meal may be a way that you share your story with others. So I'm excited for you as you go through the various healing modalities in these conferences to be open to the various ways that you can tell your story. Share your story, embrace your story. And of course, silence. So maybe take a moment here as we close. Just be silent and notice the quality of your relationship with silence. Is it something you crave more of? Or is silence a struggle? Perhaps it's somewhere in the middle. And perhaps notice what is revealed in the silence. It may be helpful to bring a hand to the heart. Maybe draw your attention to the third eye. And throughout your time in the Embodiment Conference, I encourage you to find, to savor, and to work with any challenges that may come up around this healing gift of silence. I personally want to extend my thanks, my gratitude to you for embracing your own healing through embodied practices and for guiding others, shepherding others, inspiring others in the same process. There is a lot of work ahead of us to heal the world. Yet I fundamentally believe that we can only hope to heal as a planet, we can only hope to heal as societies when we have healed the individual wounds that are keeping us stuck. Consider that trauma means wound, and wounding is a peculiar thing. Some wounds can heal up pretty well on their own, others need a great deal of assistance, and other wounds, if they're left untreated, unaddressed, can continue to fester and infect, and we end up bleeding all over each other. So consider that, yes, and I think it's well established to those of us who are interested in this conference that total healing of trauma must involve the body, must come through the body. And so by engaging in this work of embodied healing, you are helping people and you yourself are healing your wounds. And when we can heal the wounds that keep us stuck, we are really stopping this cycle of continuing to blast out that impact of our wounding on everybody else. So I thank you for your role in this process of bringing healing and restoration to our world.